I'll do a little intro while I'm doing this. We were asked by our district leadership to basically come up with a keynote presentation around AI, knowing that AI is this new landscape that we are working in, and what did our staff in our district need to know about AI in order to, move forward and kind of prepare our learners for the future. Yeah, so that was the context. And so Jen and I, over the course of the summer, actually took a generative AI literacy course that was also a trainer course. So it taught me how the basics of how generative AI works, as well as how to teach people about generative AI. So from that, we got the latest research, studies, news about AI, and really sifted through that. Jen and I met and we figured out what were the information and resources that were most pertinent for our teachers and our staff to begin to adopt AI. And so we sat down, we sifted through that, and we crafted this. Our theme here is a camping theme. And I believe, Jen, this is your slide. I'm gonna let you go.
Yeah. So, you know, we like a good theme for a presentation, and so we've gone kind of with this camping theme when it comes to AI. So, as educators, as teachers, we're all kind of in the wilderness now. Right now, with artificial intelligence, literally the landscape that we are on changes daily. Like I just had an AI image misinformation lesson that I just did. I'm going to need to change it before January because Nano Banana just came out, and so now things are going to have to change. It's changing daily. Um, if we all were to sit here and pretend that we are still staying in a hotel as we're teaching and everything, that would not be really coming to terms with the reality that we're living right now. Like we are out in the wilderness, and we need to recognize that we didn't choose to be here, but we're here now, and we got to figure out how to navigate this with these students that we have with us on our journey. And that could be hard, that could be perilous, that can change daily and everything, but there's also a lot of promise of what could possibly happen out here also.
Yeah, so we recognize that the world of AI is absolutely massive. There are so many subtopics within the realm, but we know there are issues on here that we don't have the time really or the expertise to really dive into. Things like the environmental impact are a very serious concern for a lot of people with all of the energy consumption that it uses. Copyright and ownership, particularly in the arts, is a big concern here. Our focus that we really tried to dive into that was the most applicable to all the different roles in our realm was the educational and ethical dilemmas. And so that's what we decided to focus on.
So we want to kind of hit what is usually at the forefront of all educators' minds when we talk about artificial intelligence, and we talk about that within the classroom context, which is this idea of trying to summit without the hike. So imagine, if you will, you are in the wilderness with a group of students, and you are going on this long hike together. And if you get through this hike, which is going to be a little grueling, it's going to be a little hard, and everything. If you get to the end of this hike, the students that you're with are going to be able to go on longer hikes. They're going to be able to go on more difficult hikes, ones that have harder terrain, and everything. And you're okay with your students having like a little bit of help. You're okay with them having a compass, maybe, or a trail map or something like that. Like you as an educator are like, yeah, that's fine. You can have that to be able to help you and everything. So that's where you're at with your students. But then you have one group of students who decides they want to use a different tool, and they pick out their phone and they call a helicopter, and that helicopter picks them up and takes them up to the summit and lands them there. They made it, right? Like they got to the end goal of where you wanted them to be. So some might argue, if our students have the ability to have a helicopter in their pocket at any moment, well, what's even the point of the hike anymore? Like, do they even really need to do all of this hard, grueling work until they get to the summit? What's the point of it anymore? And we as teachers, we as educators know that it's important. We know that the struggle is important. Students at the summit have no idea what they missed, much less have mastered it. But students don't always necessarily see this dilemma and everything. They don't have that kind of forward thinking and everything. They're just there in the moment and they can fix a problem for themselves because they've got too much on their plate or they just don't want to do it. That's the dilemma that we're kind of facing right now. So bringing this back into out of the campsite metaphor right here and bringing it into the real world. 2023, Stanford University did this study. It was called Cheating in the Age of Generative AI, a high school survey of cheating behaviors before and after the release of ChatGPT. So we know cheating's going to be around like forever. It's not going away. Students are going to cheat in one way, shape, or form. So what this university study did is they surveyed students before ChatGPT came out, and then they surveyed them after ChatGPT came out in 2023 and asked them, did you cheat on your assignments in some way, shape, or form, and everything. And this was self-reported and everything. So students self-reported that 60 to 70% of them said, I have cheated in some way, shape, or form. And that number actually did not change between before ChatGPT came out and after. The rate of cheating didn't change. Just the methods that they were using is what changed. Now, I feel like as someone who walks the halls every single day, I walk in my library every single day and I watch students do their homework. This is not shocking. And everything, like we know that they're cheating. I can see them doing it in my library sometimes and everything. But really, it is the methods that they're using has changed. So here's some more information right here. This is a couple of different studies kind of combined into one of them being a Stanford study and one of them being this Pew Research study between 2022, 2023, and 2024. And so this is what it's looking like over time. In 2022, 7% of students said that they had used ChatGPT in some way for their homework. In 2023, this nearly doubled to 13%. And then in 2024, doubled again to 26%. So as it becomes more well known and as students get craftier with it and everything, we're only going to see it increase more and more and more. And there are endless tools students can use. One of the most popular that we see our students use is Snapchat. If you're not aware that Snapchat has this filter, if I can play this little video right here, this is me using Snapchat to scan an AP World assignment right here and have it finish it for me. And there's all the answers and everything. So and also with ChatGPT and AI becoming ubiquitous in our world, it is in everything these days. Those ethical lines become really blurred for students when they're seeing it everywhere, incorporated everywhere. Their questions about where exactly they can use it and when exactly they should use it, that becomes really blurred as well.
So you may be thinking, like many educators, well, what do we do now, right? We have this map. We're trying to get students through this learning hike, but we know they have all these tools in their pockets. Cheating isn't new, but how do we ensure learning, especially when we feel that I'm trying to use my clicker now. How do we combat this? Hooray, it's working. When students all have their helicopters and they're all going to just fly off into the sunset, subverting learning and not really helping us reach our goals. And so I started to think, what other challenges have we faced previously in our careers and how did we get through it? What are other times when maybe we felt like our work was hard or hopeless? And so I put on my background as a historian and my historian hat, and I started to look back and I thought of COVID and how that was a time when many of us had to shift. We had to collaborate, we had to work together, and we got through it through these strategies, right? Leaning on each other as educators with our different skill sets. We flipped our classrooms and found ways to connect with students virtually in different formats, learning new technologies, and then focusing in on the skills and knowledge that were most essential that students absolutely had to have in order to make it to that next learning target. So that was the first thing I thought of, in the height of this pandemic, because the way that we shifted was through these strategies. But I recognize that's not really completely the same thing. Kristina, you're talking about a global pandemic, which is quite different from a rapid technological leap or advancement. So I went back even a little bit farther and I tried to think of other major shifts. When in recent educational history has the way in which students have accessed information changed so majorly? And I thought of the early 2000s, really that dot-com boom, the advent of Google. And I thought particularly just of 2004. And I asked our teachers in this major keynote session how many of them had been teaching in 2004. And a large amount of them had. I was quite shocked how many of our teachers, how much experience we have. And in that moment, it made me think of also myself. I was in the classroom, but I came from the perspective of a high school student. And so from that, I remember thinking that the advent of the internet was something that allowed me to have all of the information at my fingertips. No longer was my teacher that sage on the stage and holder of all the information, but I would be able to do my own research and gain my own information. And I found that I wasn't alone in feeling that way. A Pew Research study at the time, in about early 2000, said that about 94% of online teens had used the internet for school research. And my teachers, though, many of them were skeptical, much as teachers are now about the use of AI. And my teachers, though, they didn't ban us from using it, right? They could have, and maybe some of them did. My teachers didn't. In fact, what they did, they adapted. They didn't ban, they shifted. Instead, we started focusing in on what skills were needed in order to evaluate the credibility of the information we were finding on the internet. I remember going to the library and learning about how to use search engines and databases and really get these tools. What they did was they began to transition up Bloom's taxonomy from these lower levels up to these higher analysis and evaluation. And in fact, I also remember we did more presentations than ever before. And so while teachers were shifting, they weren't shifting necessarily what they taught. For example, the history, social science content standards haven't changed since 1998, right? So the content and the what they were teaching remained the same. They just began to shift in how and the strategies that they used. I recall doing many group presentations, research presentations to apply the skills of both the knowledge of the content as well as the strategies of accessing the information. And so I think we're at this major reflection point right now where we can't really turn our backs on AI and its capabilities. We know it comes with massive risks, but we also recognize it has great potential to further our students' development in their skills that they would need for the future. And so it brought me to this greater question of, well, why are we here as educators in this field and not the cheesy, what's your why? Why do you come every day? But something greater of what's our big goal? What are we trying to do as a collective? And what's that collective purpose? I have a very strong belief that we are collectively trying to prepare our students to reach their American dream, to be successful, to be able to be happy and fulfilled and contributing members of society. And so with that, I started to dive into some of the reports from the World Economic Forum. They do this the Future of Jobs report, which they'd just done in January. And within it, it made me look into this section right here on the skills that students will need in order to be employed. So in this section, they actually surveyed employers about the skills that were needed. And the economists here actually have most recently taught economics, and they asked them about core skills. So what are skills that students need now and then in 5 years? So now and in 5 years. And they asked them specifically about AI and big data. Now, of the employers that were surveyed, there were 46% of them said that AI is a core skill now. Kids need this now for the work that they do, students, employees. And they projected that in 2030, the same respondents said that by 2030, 88% will be a core skill to have AI in their pocket to be able to do their work. And like great economists, we love graphing things. So they took all of this numerical data and they turned it into coordinates like X and Y, and they plotted it on a graph so that they could see the relationships and trends between these different skills. So that's what I'm going to show you next. And here is this lovely, overly complicated graph that I'll break down for you. Now, again, on this x-axis down here, we have the core skills now. So anything near that 0 point is going to be less essential now. Anything over all the way on the right is going to be more essential now. And then along the y-axis here, we have core skills of 2030. So in 5 years, anything near the top, those are going to be very important things in 5 years. Anything near the bottom, not so essential in the future. So if we look at this, we notice AI and big data is that purple dot kind of near the top middle. Again, there's that 46% saying, hey, it's kind of important now, but in the future, we see that major jump. And so with this graph, it creates two major zones that I want to kind of zoom into. It creates this zone of skills that are out of focus, the bottom left-hand corner, where it shows that, hey, these things are not essential now and not projected to increase. And then it jumps over into the top right, where these are things that are important now and are only going to increase in importance. So zooming into those sections, we're going to start with those out of focus skills. When we look at these things, as a teacher, particularly if you are a core content area teacher, it's a bit concerning. Wait a second, you're telling me that employees of the future are not going to need to have strong reading, writing, and mathematics skills? I'm sorry, what? That's kind of shocking to me. And what we see is instead, there's this belief that AI will be doing most of that heavy lifting and that those employees will already have that. It's kind of a given. It's a foundational skill that they've learned in their K-12 education, but won't need additional training for when they pursue their employment. And so we look at, when we compare this to the skills of the future, again, we see AI and big data. We see also a lot of soft skills, things like resilience, flexibility, and agility, creative thinking, analytical thinking. These are more of the how and not the what. So again, that shift in what teachers did back in the early 2000s, when we had the advent of the internet, we're going to focus on how we learn rather than what we learn. So we develop those skills. And then these economists decided, you know what, we need to corroborate this data. This is just the perception of employers. So we need to look at now, what about the capabilities of generative AI? And so there was this fear that it would automate all of our work, right? That we would eventually, every job would be done completely automated by AI. However, they actually asked ChatGPT of those same skills that they had employers evaluate, which of them do you, generative AI, have the capacity to do? And what we see here is these are actually really high capacity, high or moderate capacity. Those same bottom left-hand corner of those out of focus skills, generative AI has the ability to read and analyze and summarize and do some basic math fairly well. It has some strong capabilities there. A lot of that bottom left quadrant is represented here. But then when we look at what can't it do? These are the things that generative AI is unlikely to replace humans with. And again, when we look over at the bottom, these are the lowest capacity items. Everything on the bottom of the list, very low capacity to be replaced by generative AI. When you look at that list, again, creative thinking, we see resilience, flexibility, agility. So what employers' perceptions are right on with what generative AI believes it has the capacity to do. So what we see is that rather than automate, generative AI is going to augment the work of humans of the future. So what we see is the skills here requiring nuanced understanding, complex problem solving, or sensory processing are areas that generative AI will not be able to replace humans. This is the human element is still going to be required for these types of skills. We see this represented in the shifting frontier. Rather than automate, we're going to augment. We see that people, this is of our tasks that we do in a day as an aggregate. We see that people are doing 47% of their own tasks. They are collaborating with generative AI for, I can't see the bottom, my little thing's in the way. I think it's 30%. Yeah, and then technology is doing 22%. And what we see is that's going to more evenly balance over time. We will augment our work more evenly with generative AI, allowing us as humans to focus on those complex problem solving, nuanced tasks more deeply in our work. And so augmentation will become, did I go back? Yeah, here we go. So for employers, these insights emphasize the need for us to upskill that focus on advanced prompt writing skills and broader generative AI literacy. So then we went to look at, well, generative AI and higher ed, how's it being addressed there? We were trying to come from the high school perspective and what are we preparing students for? If they don't want to straight enter the workforce and they're going to be going to college, what do we need to prepare them for? And we had a hard time finding local policies. At the time we created this presentation, but we did find a fairly robust one from CSU North State. And they did a really interesting work in outlining specifically the ethical implications. So identifying what is academic integrity, acknowledging plagiarism and cheating, and specifically identifying AI in that. So we really liked that they were clear and specific in outlining that. They then really focused in on kind of the why. Okay, we know it's easier for you to do it this way, but why shouldn't you? You know, and some of those warnings really fell here in this critical thinking box that over-reliance on AI can really impair your ability to develop your own critical thinking skills. And rather, it shouldn't be a substitute for learning, but we should use it as a tool.
So that's a good transition there. So I'm going to take it now from a little bit more like broad policy and everything and bringing it back down to every day in our classroom. So, you know, when we think about that, we're on this hike with our students and we are trying to get to this summit and everything, the question really for educators becomes not if we bring in some sort of generative AI thing, but when we should to make it the most effective. If we bring it in too early, we're going to miss out on some foundational skills and everything. If I give a student a GPS device or something like that too early and everything, and they just automatically think that that device is always going to give me accurate information and that this way's north, it's definitely north and everything. And we don't give them the more foundational skills of things like, well, in the northern hemisphere, you know, moss always grows on the north side of the trees. If we don't teach them that foundational skill before, they're not going to know when they look at the piece of technology if it's accurate or not, because sometimes it can't be. And what if it dies, or what if they don't have it at that moment and everything? We need to build those foundational skills as well. So I want to introduce a term, and maybe you've heard this term before in the world of education and such, that really sort of helped me it sort of like encapsulated my struggle with AI because, as a teacher librarian and everything, I can see the advantages and I can also see the harm that it can cause and everything. So it's really a term that's kind of helping me frame my own decisions. And it's this idea of cognitive offloading. It's when we let technology carry the mental weight for us. And AI makes this super easy to do, but we've actually been doing this for quite some time. So I have a question for everyone. And this question is, how many phone numbers do you have memorized right now? Like, think about it. Like, how many do you honestly have memorized? But let me also ask, can you still recite your third grade's best friend's phone number? At least me, when, I grew up in the 80s and 90s and everything, I can tell you still to this day, her phone number is 4625343. Not anymore. She doesn't live in that house anymore and everything. But like that was her phone number and everything. And I had to carry that mental weight of all of my friends' phone numbers and everything because I didn't have anything I could cognitively offload that too. So, we've been doing cognitive offloading for quite some time. So the question really kind of becomes, when is it okay to cognitively offload a task? And when do we want students to have a productive struggle instead? When do we want them to struggle a little bit? And maybe you're sitting there right now, as an educator, as a teacher, and everything, and thinking to yourself, yeah, I want them to struggle. Like, I want this to be difficult. I want this to be hard. I want them to grow those brains and everything. Let's see if the science backs you up. So, this is a study done at MIT in June of 2025. So, it's a fairly recent study. They took 54 students and they divided them out into 3 different groups. Group number one was doing a writing task with no tech tools whatsoever. Group number two was to do a writing task using only a basic search engine. And then group number three could do a writing task relying on a large language model. What they did is when they had them do this writing task, they hooked them up to an EEG. So they were measuring their brain waves as they were doing the writing task. And once they were done, their writing was evaluated by humans as well as AI graders as well. And they went through an interview once they were done where they had to talk about their ownership of the essay. So that was kind of the study right there. Here are some key findings that they found. The first thing that they found is they found that the users that were in that group three that were using a large language model had weaker brain connectivity. So their brains were not firing in all the ways that you would see normally with the other groups and everything. And they also had weaker ownership of their work as well. They couldn't recall quite as much of what was in the work and everything like that. And again, as educators, yeah, duh. Like MIT, you didn't have to do the whole entire study on that for me to tell you that was going to be the results right there and everything. But here's what they found that was really interesting. So, like I said, that they did multiple writing tasks. They actually did 4. The first 3 they did just like normal as like their controls. The fourth one, though, they switched the groups around. So they had people who were in group 3, they moved them up to group 1, where they were now writing an essay with no tech tools, and they moved those people down to group 3. There was no group 2 in the fourth writing task, by the way. And they also gave them a topic they had already written on. Okay, so it wasn't like a brand new topic or anything. They had already written on this topic. And what they found when they did this was that the effects lasted. Even though that group 3 was now writing with no tech tools whatsoever, when they switched back, the effects still lingered. In conclusion, our analysis indicates that repeated essay writing without AI leads to strengthening of brain connectivity in multiple bands, reflecting an increased involvement in memory, language, and executive control networks. Prior use of AI tools, however, appears to modulate this trajectory. So even though they were not using any AI whatsoever, their brains were still in what they called like low effort mode. And they called this cognitive debt is what they called this. You can see right here, these findings resonate with current concerns about AI in education. While AI can be used to support during a task, there may be a trade-off between immediate convenience and long-term skill development. And they also talked about going forward, a balanced approach is advisable, one that might leverage AI for routine assistance, but can still challenge individuals to perform core cognitive operations themselves. And finally, they talked about how during the early learning phases, having full neural engagement is essential for developing the brain. So, taking those shortcuts and everything leads to weaker connectivity in the brain. They have found this now through these scientific efforts. So the question as educators kind of comes, when? And that's a really tricky question because, as Kristina talked about, these are skills that, employers are going to be looking for. It's not going away. So, when exactly should it come in? Now, I can speak as a high school educator. When we presented this to our board, when we presented this to our teachers in a keynote and everything, I made this statement as just me, myself, and I, after going through this whole entire thing and everything, that we felt, or I felt, that we needed to resist the urge for bringing in any kind of AI into our classrooms with underclassmen, with our freshmen and our sophomores. No, we're developing core cognitive skills at that point. We're developing the foundational skills. Those first 2 years are vital. We always find that if students aren't doing well at the end of their sophomore year, they are not going to be on a good path in their junior or senior year. That is kind of like the breaking point right there. So, we need to state that to our students really clearly, that no, we're not going to use any kind of AI tools. And I don't want you to use any kind of AI tools because these 2 years are so incredibly vital. Once we get past that and we've built those foundational skills, we can then start to use it a little to help push them a little bit further and everything. But it's just so essential to build those foundational skills.
Yeah, and so this brings us to the real practical classroom applications. What are we doing with students about this in the classroom? So I have some trail markers for you, as well as some common shortcuts for you to look out for with student AI use. So first, my clicker is not working.
Is it not working again? I can click for you,
Can you
Kristina.
click for me? Thank you.
I want to jump in really quick and just do a quick time check, just so we have time to wrap up your amazing presentation and then also to transition into our breakout room. So if we could finish in the next like 3-4 minutes, that would be amazing.
Yep,
Thank
this
you.
part's super quick.
We're right at the
Absolutely.
end.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So how do we guide students through AI use? Knowing that we're asking students to do challenging things that sometimes are scary in the classroom, things that they've never done before. It might be like crossing a rope bridge above a canyon here. So click. So how can we protect the productive struggle when students have AI at their fingertips? If you'll click, we know that students will sometimes use it uninformed because they, again, don't want to be embarrassed or scared that they might fail. If you'll click, what we need to do about that to the next click is establish clear guidelines, really define acceptable use and what it looks like, not only for your course, for the course that you teach, but even for major assignments. It might be acceptable in maybe some of those earlier kind of skills that they already have, but especially not for others. So clearly defining that. Then also teaching them what are responsible practices, how you should evaluate and critically analyze the output that AI gives you, maybe educating them on bias and what to look for in that regard. And then finally, just like any practice, you're going to need to monitor it and you're going to need to guide them. Recognize when they're maybe ignoring all of your guidelines and practices and continuing to use it still. So if you'll click again, we would then be at this place of responsible AI integration. And I think it's about 4 more clicks, Jim. We would have what clearly defined, so that protecting the productive struggle. And by using AI responsibly, then we get to 1 more click, those skills of the future. And then that's where we are. What kind of camp are we running? We really need to be clear and transparent with students about not only our expectations, but also when we are using it. I think modeling in that way, hey, I've used it to develop this rubric, right? Because that's going to be really easy for me to clearly communicate with you. So always connecting to the why and the how we've used it.
Thank you
That's
both so much. This is like truly an amazing presentation.